Good morning, everyone. Suzanne Taylor King here for another Friday edition of Unlock Your Way with STK. And I'm really excited for today's conversation with Cory Firth. He is a human impact strategist and so much more than just that. And I'm excited to dive in to all things personal development, human exploration, and growth. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to be here, Susan. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Now, total transparency. This is Cory, and my first conversation. I found him on LinkedIn and was intrigued by the way he talked about himself, described what he does, and of course, some of the work he's doing in the world. Cory, tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah. So I think the central thesis that I kind of lean into is um, the exploration of ourselves has been suppressed by uh, intertwining of multiple systems in our society.
Mm,
And that innate desire to explore ourselves, our consciousness, is is starting to become a bigger part of what it means to be well. And I
mm,
develop projects and companies that subvert the current model of mental disorder that is at the core of what's keeping us from exploring ourselves.
mm,
That's what I do for a living, and I have some really cool work in that space. But I'd say the core of like who I am and why I do this is because I'm a father. I have a daughter who's 3 years old, and I think like everybody when they become a parent, they want to create a new world so that it's a little bit better off for the kids that they bring into the world. And so yeah, I think about that daily, multiple times a day, and how I can show up more authentically for myself and for her, and to create projects and creative endeavors in the world that help to support her evolution as she grows, and not to take away the challenges that she's going to experience, but to allow her to embrace them and allow them and balance out um, that sort of uh, challenge and desire to grow as she evolves.
it's so beautiful. And I want to just say that feeling comes across with the way you talk about what you do, because what you do is who you are. And I really think that space of being in a business or a company or 10 companies can only come when you've really dove into that self exploration and know yourself better than you know anyone else. What does that look like for you? What's the journey been?
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. That's the goal, right? To be as like authentic as
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
and that's the effort every day to challenge the ego to make
Mhm.
sure I am. And that's not always perfect, of course. But yeah, my journey, I guess I would say, like, kind of coming back to what I how I introduced myself around the disorder model. I just didn't fit into the disorder model of mental illness. I
Mm.
didn't fit into the education system. Unfortunately, I was kind of the class clown. I didn't really fit into that box. Felt really, yeah, like claustrophobic in the classroom, and needed to express myself, and was kind of suppressed in a way in that environment. Um, and I guess it really comes down to I was born with a suppressed gene that keeps me from regulating serotonin normally in my body. And serotonin is a key chemical that helps us to
Yeah.
regulate our mood and our mental health.
Yeah.
I didn't know this until I was 28 after doing some genetic testing and some work with a couple doctors to figure that out. But what I was told once I kind of did understand this a little bit more was that I'd be more susceptible to things like anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. Three
Mhm.
things I really struggled with throughout my life, but also that I would be a poor responder to things like antidepressants and talk therapy, which are the two primary methods for treating
Yeah.
mental health in North
Yeah.
America. And so that's what I mean by I didn't fit into the disorder model. And so I had to kind of take it into my own hands at some point. I had to kind of I just I say like break free from the systems, and I try to say that in a way that's not like conspiratorial or fighting fire with fire or sticking it to the man or anything like that. Because I think the model does work for a lot of people. I mean, it exists because it has helped, right? So
Mhm.
I've realized over time that um, the averages within the system are the averages of the most sick. And so when we look at someone who is sort of functionally well, we don't have a lot of good treatment options or preventative measures for keeping someone functionally well. And so I was dysfunctional in a way, right, from like a brain chemistry perspective, but everything else about my body was generally healthy. So I needed to find other ways to sort of
Mhm.
balance things out. And that was a 7, 8. I mean, it's still a journey, right? It's still an
Yeah.
ongoing thing. But once I unlocked that, I kind of unlocked this skill of self exploration, is sort of what I would say. And that inspired all kinds of really cool experiences. One of the main ones being encountering psychedelics and really using psychedelics in a deeper way to unlock a little bit more understanding of who I am, why I'm here, and what I can do for myself to take my health and well-being into my own hands. And
Mm,
that has been just like an incredible journey. Very, very challenging, very, very hard, because there aren't systems to support it. But I
yeah.
think we're changing that now, and so that's been a big part of my journey and kind of where I'm at today.
It's really, what stood out for me as you described that as a mom of a 15-year-old, I was feeling the journey up until you were 28 and kind of figured out that, oh, there genetically, there's something off. And then looking back, how much did that explain for you about your teenage years and your early 20s?
Yeah, a ton. Because I mean, my parents are amazing. I have the best parents in the world. I have two like, incredible step parents, all very, very loving. Grew up in a really loving home. Um, but we didn't know what we didn't know back then,
Right.
and they didn't know what they didn't know, and so I really sort of suffered in silence in a lot of ways because there was no marker for this. There was no
Mhm.
definition for what I was going through because, like I said before, we kind of define mental health on the averages of the most sick. So it's not matching up with my environment or my experience. Sorry, but I also grew up playing a lot of competitive sports, specifically hockey. And in that environment, there's a whole nother layer of sort of suppression of emotions there where, you're meant to, suck it up and, work, 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 work. And I'm
Tough guy.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm totally a fan of the idea of work. But
Mhm.
recently I've taken on a new understanding of what work is. And Khalil Gibran has a great quote about work, and he says, "Work is love made visible." And so when I
Mm,
sort of unlocked a deeper understanding here through the genetic testing, but then like even deeper functional medicine stuff around my general health and all that kind of stuff,
mhm.
I started to realize that like self work, the idea of work has this connotation of it being challenging and hard, and it was for me, of course, and maybe in some ways it has to be a little bit, but there also needs to be a balance of um, it being natural and it being part of evolution, because evolution and the natural order of progress of us as humans, and I think in the natural order of the world, has chaos and order. It has dark and light, and so I had eventually found sort of a more balanced approach, and that was sort of another layer of the exploration journey where it started to become a little bit more easier because I see consciousness exploration, self exploration as a day to day act, much like how we sleep. We have a state of consciousness exploration in our day to day experience that we just have been completely closed off to. And so that has been really fun to explore and um, to put out into the world and just share and just, see what other people think. And if they align to it, they align to it. If they don't, they don't.
Yeah. Well, I think what stands out as well is that, my journey with the self-exploration as an entrepreneur all started with a diagnosis, and I didn't want to accept a diagnosis, and it was not even a question to accept and, go into the medical system. And it was a 3-year journey of figuring out what actually was wrong. And during that time, there was so much resistance from other people, whether it was, the 4 different neurologists I went to, or the 4 different chiropractors I was seeing, or my family wanting me to just give in and go on the meds, like, do what the doctors say. And it was this intuitive thing with me that said, "Don't do that. More investigation is needed." And a lot of that investigation became internal, but a lot of it also went into looking at different solutions that were outside of the norm. And I don't know what made that okay in my mind 10 years ago, but I knew, like, it was just this thing inside of me that said, "There's an answer, and it's not this one."
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I want to be able to, and I think you're along the same lines here, that to encourage that exploration is just such a gift to be able to encourage that in other people. And I work with business owners and entrepreneurs, and I fully believe that that journey, whether it's a health journey or just knowing yourself better, is the key to your business doing better. And have you seen that connection for you, that as you explore yourself and heal yourself, whether it's, physically, emotionally, or even spiritually, that your business goes to the next level?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean there's so much there. The first thing is like I relate to your experience of going outside the system, and
Mhm.
what I the way that I would describe it is it's about self knowledge.
Mm.
Once you start to understand yourself, you start to realize that you're very unique, and the system itself isn't necessarily designed for the personal individual
Yeah.
progression of well-being. It's designed in a lot of ways as a band-aid when we're sick to heal it and make it better in the best way possible from the symptom place, not the root cause.
Yeah.
So and the same thing goes for in your business, right? Where there's these little symptoms of weakness or these symptoms
Yeah.
of breakage, and
Mhm.
we typically try to like band-aid those up and like cover the hole with some duct tape so the leak stops.
Mhm.
But the root cause of that is often, yeah, deeper, right? And it's a whole host of a bunch of different things, but I think becoming more emotionally intelligent, so that the resistance that you feel within the challenge you're experiencing translates into resilience as you dig deeper to find the root cause of whatever it is that's creating the issue. Again, yeah, very transferable between the personal evolution experience or the personal health experience to the entrepreneurial journey or the small business startup journey. So yeah, I think it's massively important, and I think it's something that is really often overlooked
Mhm.
because of again, it's very similar to the healthcare side of things.
Mhm.
The way that if you look at like, I was a part of an accelerator recently inside of a university, and the way that they teach you about business is like this is going to be very hard. You're going to have to compete, and you're going to have to fight, and you're going to have to will your way to being successful.
Mm.
And yeah, that's one way of doing it, and
Mhm.
obviously that has worked,
Mhm.
traditionally, historically over the last few hundred years. But the other way to do it is very balanced, and it's
Yeah.
allowing all of the things, the challenge, the competition, but rather than sort of build the biggest boat, it's about bringing everybody along with you because we all will benefit from the exchange of knowledge, and that's where I think coming back to the healthcare side of things is what is missing, and it represents the other systems too. I would say is
Mhm.
that the gatekeeping of medicine or the gatekeeping of treatment is through that system that we rely on. But then the gatekeeping of knowledge of what it means to be healthy is also dictated by that system. And so the more that we can remove the gates to the knowledge, the more that we can create, I think, a more holistic way of being. And that goes for business as well, to sort of open up the idea that, yeah, there might be challenge, but if you approach it in this way, more consciously, that challenge um, becomes more easy to
Mhm.
manage, and actually is a signal for growth personally and for the business. So yeah, I guess that'd be my summary of that. I kind of
Yeah.
forget the question, but
No, it really wasn't a question. It was just, this connection. I often people ask me a lot about networking and, building a great referral network because they see me doing it and they're like, "Well, how did you do that?" And I kind of relate it to dating. Like you have to talk to enough people, figure out if you're compatible, figure out if the other person has an abundance of people to actually refer business. And it's so correlated to dating. Of course, when I was dating, there was no apps for dating. So, a little bit different. And I'm intrigued by an app for dating. Like, you just no, 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 yes. Wow, what would that have been like, back in the day? I don't know. But business is so similar to, so many things that we're talking about, whether it's health healing. In order to succeed, I remember when I realized that I had a little leak in my very first website when I was a health coach. And I thought no one was interested in what I had. Nobody was interested in working with me. It was 100% victim spiral. And I came into my computer one day, and this was at least 15 years ago, so I was not as tech savvy as I am now. And I realized that leads were coming into my website, but they weren't being absorbed by my CRM. So they were all still in my website. And it was this instant realization that I was the problem, the technology was the problem. I had 600 people sitting there who have not heard from me in the last, 8 months. Oh my god. And I promised myself after that, it was never gonna be victim in business again. It was gonna be, "Okay, if I'm the problem, what is the problem, and fix it. And if I don't know how to fix it, let's find somebody who does." And I think that willingness to say, "I'm the problem," has happened hundreds of times, and it's allowed greater growth because I'm willing to take negative criticism.
yeah, because you're the problem and the solution, right? It's about
Yeah,
accountability. It feels like in a lot of ways because
yeah,
and it's a lot about the stories that we tell ourselves, like, "Oh, I'm not good
mhm,
enough," or "I'm not worthy
yep,
of people's
yeah,
attention or money," or whatever.
yeah,
And I go through that all the time, still, all the time. But for me, I've studied habit change, I've studied behavioral health, and I have to remind myself that, like, the best path forward is just the path forward, whatever step can be taken, no
right,
matter what the story is or the emotion behind it all. To me, um, my understanding of habits, which I think is a big part of our behavioral health, of course. And it's
mm,
also about how we achieve something. So whether it's in business or in like our transformation in our physical body or our relationships or whatever, it's 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 a really it's a really interesting cycle that we go through. Like our environments influence our beliefs influence our thoughts influence our emotions influence our behavior creates our habits create our outcomes. And we get stuck like oftentimes in one of those things, right? We
yeah,
don't know what the environmental influence is that's inputting into our belief systems. And then we don't really self-reflect on our belief systems enough to know how that's influencing our thoughts. We get stuck in an emotion and we don't really realize the things that we're thinking about are guiding that, and then that just creates this cycle of procrastination or an
yeah,
unwillingness to like move through the thing and do the thing. But just like one bite of the elephant every day on one of those things as you're struggling through something it leads to just such a huge compounding effect, business or physiology. So I think that is something I've had to learn the hard way, and it's something like I'm challenged with every single day. I'm sure you are as well, and I think anyone is in this world.
Well, the way you just described it, um, I saw it as like a map or a ladder, and for some reason I see in pictures, which is one of the reasons I've never, and we'll talk a little bit about psychedelics, why I would be nervous about that if I already see in pictures without it. Ooh, that might be interesting for me. Um, but seeing that in a picture of the way everything is influenced by everything in your being, that as soon as you realize that it's your emotions that are kind of directing things, you can become the director of your emotions and not allow things to upset you or aggravate you or whatever's happening. And that changes the outcome, that changes the habit. And I always go back to food for this because I started out as a health coach and a trainer and all of the things. And if you can fix your food, so much else in your life changes. And people struggle with the processed foods, the junk food, the sugar, all of the things. And I used to just say, well, just stop, just become the person that doesn't do that. And that allows you to change your habit. But most people call it willpower and say, oh, I just don't have willpower. If the sugar is in front of me, I eat it. Or if candy is in front of me, I eat it. Well, then my theory is you don't want that outcome as much as you say you do. And the emotion that you feel before you eat crap is what's driving the crap eating. And I got a lot of grief for that back in the day of that. Susan Pierce Thompson talks about bright line eating, draw a line in the sand and just become the person who doesn't eat candy. I think the same is true in business, in life, and in parenting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have I have some opinions about this, but just from my own experience, like I think it's I think willpower is super overrated. I think it's
Mhm.
actually a block
Yeah.
um to change. And I think
Mhm.
to really create change, it goes back to what I was saying before. And this is like what I was saying before, describing sort of habit change with environments, beliefs, thoughts, emotions. That is part of like a method that I teach in coaching. When I do coach, I take on I'm working on some creative projects right now that keep me from being able to coach more. But when I do, that's what I teach people how to do, is to just to
Mhm.
create change, because it's about change. People want to create change, but they don't know why, and they don't know what's in the way. And that's where they're typically like at the end, which is the outcome. They're like, I want
Mhm.
this outcome. And then they might know a little bit about what's keeping them from the outcome, which is the habit. They might know a little bit about the behaviors, but they might know a little bit about the emotions. They probably
Mhm.
don't know as much about the thoughts. They probably haven't examined their beliefs, and they really likely have not understood the environmental inputs. And that's the present environmental inputs and the past environmental inputs. The past
Yes.
environmental inputs are the ones that are really harder to kind of find and to
Mhm.
dissect and understand. But when you start with why you want to change and you really understand like the devotion to change and the commitment to change, then you can reverse engineer that cycle backwards. And I see you speak in, or you see in pictures, and it's a
Yeah.
cycle, right?
Yeah.
It's a circle, and so you're constantly evaluating all of those things, and those things are always at play. The environmental inputs are always at play. It's the people that are in your life today, the people that were in your life before, that have influenced you from a young age to believe the
Mhm.
things that you believe. It's the content that you consume. It's the people that you choose to listen to, virtually, through books, through podcasts, through TV, through movies. And that's a good place to start, because that helps you just really understand, like, why are you actually trying to make this change? Are you making this change because you really want to make the change, or are you making this change because someone told you that it's a worthy pursuit? That doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean you should do it. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really fun thing to like watch someone like unlock that, because they move beyond that kind of idea of willpower, and belief. The belief system is really what creates the identity to change. But if you don't understand how to like break a belief, then you can't just do it. You can't just say you
Right.
got to do it. You can't. Also, the other side of it is there's a balance to all of this. We've created candy. I love
Mhm.
candy. It's okay. Every once in a while, if you have a better relationship with your belief systems and the environments and all those things I talked about before, then you can see that candy is just a piece of something in your environment that you can choose to enjoy or choose
Oh,
to
I love that.
vilify. And I
I
think the
love that.
vilification of these things, that's the
Yeah,
same thing for drugs. We can talk about psychedelics at some point, but the vilification of drugs is a really big problem in this today's environment. We choose to believe that this one is better than this one, but they all have inherent risks and inherent benefits. Just like candy. Candy makes you feel a little bit good. It tastes good. It doesn't
yeah,
necessarily mean that like gorging on a whole bag of candy is going to be good for you long term, and it's not going to be good for your metabolic health, but I think you
right.
get what I'm saying. Yeah.
I do, and I feel it. I have so much I wanna say about
Hmm.
things in moderation, but, I've been able to achieve really great things physically because of what I am able to do mentally, and I really think business is the same. I think relationships are the same. I wanna touch a little bit on parenting. You have a three-year-old, and how has this affected just this idea of your self-exploration, knowing yourself? How has it improved your parenting, and how has it made it more difficult?
Um, it's a good question. I have like a four dummies approach to everything. You know those yellow books, the four dummies
Yeah.
books? So I try to like think of things very simply. And so the way that I kind of categorize my human experiences in sort of four buckets: biological, psychological, socio-environmental, and spiritual. And
Perfect.
so
It's the little
I look
boxes that are in those books.
yeah,
It's perfect.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think of like how does the parenting journey impact all of those things? Like
Mhm.
biologically, I have a daughter and I grew up with two brothers. So I don't know that experience of what it's like to grow up as a little girl. And
Mhm.
so that has changed me biologically. I'm sure I've tracked my hormones and different things like that around the time that she was born and stuff. And there's you can look at some pretty cool research to show like what changes in the men just as much as not just as much as what changes in women, but there's
Yeah.
change in men in our sex hormones as you're becoming a parent, like through the change from like the
Oh,
gestation
yeah.
period to the actual birth. It's pretty cool to look at, and I felt that I could feel that something unlocked for me in a different way biologically when she was born,
Yeah.
and then psychologically I would say, and sort of spiritually are the two or bigger impacts of what has been both rewarding and challenging as a parent. Psychologically, I'm constantly faced now her as a toddler with the expression of her emotions,
Yeah.
where I and my partner as well, we're both very adamant about like allowing her to fully express every emotion that she has. That is the hardest thing for us because it's very difficult when we're rushed to try to go somewhere to like just sit down and just like cry with her and just like allow her to have a little emotional outburst.
Yeah.
Um, and it also challenges the way that I was not allowed to fully express in certain environments too. And
Yeah.
again, not like to criticize anyone in those environments when I was a kid, but it's just again, we don't know what we don't know. But now that we know so much, that is also part of the challenge as well, where we know what certain behaviors can do to a child in those development years, the first 3 years, the first 7 years.
Mhm.
And it's hard to like keep that at balance, keep that in the top of your mind
Right.
as you're going through the emotional experience. So there's this like really present ongoing processing experience that I'm not necessarily good at, but I'm aware of. And that is a very challenging experience that both my fiance and I sort of go through. It's also beautiful because I get to learn about my
Yeah.
childhood through her experience as a child. And then the spiritual part is the way that I've described. I, someone said this before that I'm stealing. I can't remember who it was, but there's a piece of my heart in the world now,
Mm.
and yeah, that's very raw. That's like an open wound,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So wanting to like make sure it's safe and make sure it doesn't get hurt and doesn't get harmed. I want to just create the biggest bubble around her and make sure she
Yep.
doesn't get hurt or get, influenced by something negatively, or is mean, someone is mean to her in the schoolyard or whatever. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I can't do that because that's how a heart grows as well. A heart grows through challenge. A heart grows
Mhm.
through heartache, and it's like a muscle, right? And so that is like increased my capacity for love by thinking of it that way, but it also has increased my capacity for grief. And that's how I would describe the experience of watching my daughter grow. Is it's this polarity between celebrating her beautiful development and growth while
Mhm.
also grieving who she once was. And that happens every day. Like the day to
Every
day she's different. And
every day.
so I'm constantly grieving and sad about not having the constant
Mhm.
cuddles and need for my attention, but also celebrating her independence and her growth and her strength and her expression as a little human being. So very beautiful experience, very challenging experience. But that's my summary of where we're at today as a 3-year-old in 2024.
Well, I will say you've experienced nothing until you get to the 4s.
Okay.
Everybody complained about the terrible 2s, and I called it the effing 4s. So, that was my take, but I have a boy, and he was fearless, fearless, from jumping off of things to, you know, bikes and skateboards at 4. There was always a bruise somewhere on his face or chin or something,
That was me
and
when I was a kid. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it was kinda me too, but it was different experiencing it, with a like you said, a piece of your heart out into the world, and, um, now at 15, he's spending less and less time with us and more time out in the world, more time with sports and friends and the girlfriend, and I just hope that I've done the job that I needed to do when he was under 7, right? That was my
Mm,
goal when he not working, being a stay-at-home mom, going back to school to become a coach during that time, starting my coaching practice was all because I wanted to be more available,
mm.
and it's really paid off for me because he's incredible, but at the same time it did make me realize things about my own childhood, about again, I had amazing parents, only child, but it also made me realize that the things that I'm doing and my husband and I are doing together as parents just didn't happen in the 70s. And, children were kind of be seen and not heard. And that whole idea had me stuffing emotions for years, and I had to repair that as I got older and started this self-exploration.
Wow, beautiful. You sound like a wonderful mother.
Well well, I mean, every day, every day. It's a he asked me recently why I still make him food. He's like, I can make my own food." And I was like, "Alright, don't take all the mothering away, right?" Like, there needs to be a little bit. I enjoy making everyone food. It's not just him.
Yeah,
But
my
I think
mother's like that as well. She loves when we're
yeah,
around and loves to create a
yeah,
nice little feast for us and take care
yeah,
of things because she doesn't get to do that anymore.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I think that part of parenting, was hard at first, realizing, a little one is there, all encompassing, and you have to be okay with a part of you changing, you know, not going out on Friday night, not being able to just take off and go away for 4 days, and, all those little changes felt hard when he was little, and now I look back and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm so glad I made all those adjustments to my life, and I'm so glad I chose the parenting thing because I almost didn't."
Mm, wow. Good for you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. All right, now, I wanna talk a little bit about psychedelics and well, one, the current paradigm is from my point of view is lots of retreats, lots of going into, the jungle and experiencing it. Um, Not so sure about the regulations on that. What's your take on being able to use it effectively, not as like a recreation, but to be able to use it for your own mental health journey?
Could you ask me that in a different way?
Sure. So what I see in the current marketplace is lots of retreats where you go and you experience this in a group of people. I don't see it from a medical perspective of healing or improving your mental health. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering your take on that.
Yeah, I think what the way that I've experienced it, having worked in this space for a while and advocated at the highest level for access to these things,
Mhm,
is that the pursuit of um, trying to make these things more accessible from a public, general public lens, but also from like a policy lens, from a scientific lens, from an education
mm,
lens, has challenged every system, every, like you said, the paradigm that we currently live in,
mhm,
because they have been so suppressed for 50, 60 years here in the West, but they have been used for thousands of years before that. So there's a lot of history that really doesn't come into play in the way that we talk about it here in the West these days. And so what you have is, as we're trying to as those that have seen value in these things that are creating projects and experiences and communities for these things to be more experienced, we're all trying to kind of figure it out.
mm,
And so you have your kind of business um, systems that are creating corporations
mhm,
to advance our understanding and our access to the drug themselves. Then you have organizations that are um, prioritizing the idea of pairing a psychedelic with a therapy. Um, and that is also kind of one interesting challenge that's kind of present today. And then you have the retreat model, and then you have sort of what's been classified traditionally in the last 50 years as like the underground. I would
mm,
say I would classify those people as like the existing practitioners, the people that have been
okay.
carrying the standards, creating safety, and developing paths for these things to be experienced outside of the regulatory structures, which is very challenging, very risky, and not easy to do and carry on for so long. So what we're seeing today is um, today, specifically today, like as in very, very recently, the last 50 years or so, a lot of the advocacy work has been gone into um, the combination of psychedelics and therapy together.
Mhm,
And our current regulatory systems just do not account for those two things in combination. They're very separate, right? So in the US, you've got the FDA that really just thinks about the drug. Is it safe? What does it do? That kind of stuff. Is it beneficial in comparison to other things that exist that are legal?
mhm,
But it doesn't account for how you would pair that up with therapy. And that's a very difficult thing for someone who's advocating for therapy or someone who is a therapist to be like, yes, this works. I've seen my clients do this all the time and they're going through it and they're experiencing it and it's so powerful. But because there's so many different types of therapy, it's hard to justify its effect and
yeah,
quantify its effect because it's so multifaceted and there's so many different ways to do it. And it's all very personal. It's all depending on who the therapist is and who the individual is that's going through the experience. So that's why I would say that it's kind of like we've kind of stalled out here recently because a lot of the focus has been on that. But if you look at the surveys and the research that has been done to see what and how people are using psychedelics today, they're not exploring them for therapy. Let's say they might be therapeutic, but they're doing them recreationally, which I see a lot of value in that as well. Someone I've heard recently say that the idea of recreation is recreation. So in those
oh,
environments where you're in relationship with someone,
mhm,
that's a really powerful place to heal. A lot
yes,
of therapists will say that when your trauma is caused by relationship, it's healed in relationship as well. So that type of experience doesn't have to be in a clinic. It can be with a friend on a couch, um, but it could also be at a retreat. It could also be at a party. I just think that the way that our societal standards are created through science that influences policy, that influences the education system, that influences like our societal standards. That's a very archaic system. It takes a long time to create change in that environment,
Mhm.
and it often lags behind culture in a lot of ways because the laws of culture are not really connected to that. They're connected to community. They're connected to storytelling. They're connected to what feels safe. They're connected to relationship.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a great way to account for that and to create standards of safety that can exist in those environments. But that to me is really the interesting place that I spend a lot of time. So the two organizations that I work with, one being Five, which is a education and discovery company focused on the compound 5-MeO DMT, which is the most powerful psychedelic experience. Um, we're all focused on creating safety and creating standards and bringing community together to develop best practices so that these experiences can be done in a safe way. Because of it being so powerful, we have to understand what the needs are for the individual going through it and have to create safety standards for that, because there is still a lot of, like in any industry, there's a lot of misuse, there's a lot of
Yeah.
manipulation, there's a lot of things that just people are bad actors, and you can't really account for that.
Mm.
It's just naturally going to happen. So it's a little bit of like our, the governing bodies, whatever they may be, like a therapy governing body or a regulatory governing body or a drug developer or a drug governing body or our political system. In a lot of ways, they treat the general public as like unable to think for themselves.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, but that's what's happening, in the underground, right? The existing sort of environments right now is we are trying to figure it out, and we are figuring it out pretty well. And so, like the work being done at Five, we're creating safety for those experiences to happen, so that we can show positively what can happen, even
Mhm.
with the potential risks that are there. And we're continuing to just move the boundaries slowly but surely, and creating those spaces that are environmentally friendly, that are
Yeah.
consciously, you know, created, and that are designed to keep people safe. And then the other company I work with, I helped to start up, and I'm more kind of on the strategy side now. Just sort of a small amount of my time is really focused on psychedelic safety as well here in Canada, and we developed a psychedelic first aid program.
Mhm.
And the concept there is all kind of similar to what physical first aid does and mental health first aid does, but there's nothing in this world that exists today to account for the transpersonal experience of a psychedelic. Transpersonal meaning like beyond the ego. There is a desire for a lot of people to go beyond the ego to understand what maybe troubled them in the
Yeah.
past, or just break the mold, right? Break the default mode. And we don't have like a set of standards to develop that. And so what we've done is tried to start that process. Not to say that we know exactly what it means, but to say we need to all start to think about what it means to create safety in these experiences, no matter what the experience is, especially now where a lot of the efforts are going towards focusing on psychedelics as therapy. Most people, if you look at the numbers, they're not exploring that style of experience. They're going into the basements, they're going into the parties, they're going
Right.
into the woods, they're going into the retreats, they're doing it by themselves, they're doing it with friends. So the same way that first aid, physical first aid, mental health first aid is designed for the general public and the healthcare system, we've developed a model for that as well, so that the healthcare system starts to integrate a more compassionate way to understand how these experiences are going, rather than just like sticking someone in a room and hoping the trip dies off, or
Right.
worse, hitting them with another chemical that may actually keep someone stuck. Or someone at a party, or someone in a more recreational style environment, knows how to see the difference between what is emerging and what
Mhm.
is an emergency. And there's a very clear distinction, I think, and we're becoming more aware of it now. But what's something that is emerging might feel like an emergency to the individual, but someone who's a little more conscious and has a little bit more understanding, well, I'll
Yeah.
say that are a little more psychedelically literate, they'll know that there's a difference between what is emerging and someone needs to see it and go through it, versus, okay, yeah, we need to call someone, and we need to make sure that you're physically safe and psychologically safe, and it's time to call the ambulance or whatever it may be. So
Right.
I'm kind of rambling here, but I guess in general, what I see in the current space, in the current psychedelic movement, is a really big focus on safety, because these things aren't going away, but policy is way, way behind. And we need the grassroots style community building piece
Mm.
and safety. And that's what Five and Numa does to create that level of safety across the board. And we're calling everybody in to try to develop that and co-create that.
Beautiful. It made me curious about how any of the uh, ancient or, you know, centuries old information on this is being used today. Um, like instant curiosity about where it came from, and the ancient stories of plant medicine, and I'm fascinated by all of that, and I'm wondering if any of that ancient information is being used today to kind of guide where it goes.
Yeah, it is. It is in some ways. It's not in the bigger healthcare system. Like they
Hmm.
just don't have a good way of integrating that in. It's not. We live in a society that's governed by scientific absolutism. In that, if it's
Yes.
not proven by fact and science, then we we don't we can't do anything with it. So that's how our systems are designed. But what I see in a lot of the communities, and I've done a lot of work nationally, internationally, and I've seen all kinds of different community setups and a lot of different people and leaders in this space doing this. And almost all of us and almost everyone that I've ever met is very respectful of what those are, those
Mm.
standards and those experiences. And I think that that needs to be carried forward, as I described. Creating more of a grassroots community based model is to carry those things forward, respect those things, and also at the same time create new traditions, create new ways of experiencing these things so that we can integrate the best of both worlds, the science and the sacred, the traditional and the modern. And that's difficult too in the psychedelic community. There's a lot of infighting on what that means and if that's the right thing, and how do you bring everyone to the table. And then there's a lot of tokenism too, where a group is trying to move a mission forward, and then so they bring in someone that has an indigenous background, but they don't actually really listen to them or give them a voice or allow them to guide. And so it's hard, right? Like I
Yeah.
would say, in a lot of ways, the traditional naturalistic psychedelics carry with them these standards of sacredness, and that's hard to leverage as we're trying to push the healthcare system in that direction because they don't listen to it, right?
Mm.
So um I think we're at a place where we're going to see a lot of different versions of this, and that's really beautiful. I like that, and I think that there needs to be a little bit more of a place where we can challenge each other in a respectful way to lift the whole community up, to lift the whole movement up,
Mhm.
and in a way that isn't done virtually through comment sections on social media, is done in like real in
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
um, positive dialogue. I think I use the word dialogue a lot because it's my favorite word, and I think it really leads to a lot of progression and a lot of change. And dialogue comes from the root words dia, which means moving towards, and logos, which means meaning. And so when we're in dialogue and we're challenging each other to explore, and we're doing it consciously, and we're not vindictive or we're not doing it
Mhm.
emotionally, then I think we're moving towards meaning like we've done today. And so I
Yeah.
think the more that we can bring dialogue into these discussions, all the discussions that we had today about all the systems and education and science and healthcare, but from psychedelics, like we just need more and more of that. And it's less about, creating a conference where people can just talk about their science or their business. It's talking about the real cultural change that's possible here when we talk about how these things can be adopted more mainstream in the mainstream.
Beautiful. Well said, and perfect place to wrap up our conversation. And I'm so glad I reached out to you. I'm just astonished at your wealth of knowledge, and I absolutely love even more now the way you see things connected like a map. It's almost like you're drawing this thread of connection from one thing to another, and I think you did it 3 times during our conversation, so I really love that. And I see a whole avenue of you just because that's how you see things being connected like that. So well done. Uh, and if anybody wants to follow you, reach out to you, how can we find you?
Well, first off, thank you so much for
You're
saying
welcome.
that. I really appreciate that. And then, yeah, I'm LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time commenting or like sharing thoughts and opinions and things like that.
Mhm.
But I also have a newsletter. If you go to coryfirth.com, I have a newsletter where I write once a week. Uh, there, it's me just kind of expressing my understanding of the human experience and challenging current perspectives and coming up with new ideas for how do we optimize our experience for sustainable growth. So coryfirth.com, you can find information about the projects I'm working on and the deeper thinking that I guess I get to have.
Awesome. Well, let's keep having those deeper thinking explorations within ourselves. And thank you for being one of the people that encourages that in me now. And please, everyone, if you liked what we talked about today, give us a comment and a like and subscribe to Cory's newsletter like I did, and you'll have a new fan. Thank you so much, Cory.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.